comes to choosing the next show I wanted to talk about, I thought of thinking outside the box for this next series I want to discuss. Rather than talking about the major players of TV animation with Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney, I wanted to focus on a series that was around long before those networks took the reins, as it's now time to talk about one of my favorite properties, The Muppets, which I don't think needs any introduction. Being such a massive fan of these characters, I wanted to take some time to talk about one creation from Jim Henson, but which to choose? Well, I decided to go with a show that many know about, but don't really seem to bring a lot of attention to. So it's time to check out The Muppet Babies. Yes, Muppet Babies, one of the most interesting projects to come out of the Jim Henson brand. It's a show many know about, but not many people talk about this show extensively. So I decided to take a crack at it, as the Muppet Babies have such an interesting history as far as animated shows and Jim Henson projects go, and I wanted to make a video discussing that. So let's dive into the fascinating history of the Muppet Babies. So, how did the Muppet Babies came to be? What was their initial conception? Well, kiddies, when a mommy Muppeteer and a daddy Muppeteer fall in love, they decide to... Okay, no, there was none of that sort of activity going on during the makings of these babies, if you know what I'm talking about. To really give a look into the Muppet Babies, let's go back to the first major appearance of these characters. That being when the Muppets took Manhattan. You may remember that there was a sequence in that film where Piggy imagined what life would have been like if Kermit and her grew up as little babies. This was the main thing to bring the Muppet Babies into the public consciousness, as the show came out 2 months later, though the plan for the Muppet Babies had been in the works for a while. The concept came from Henson's art department, as they were thinking about this simple idea. What if we take the Muppets and turn them into babies? Henson went through with the idea after seeing sketches of baby Miss Piggy and found it to be very charming. So they went forth to eventually make a series, though not before focusing on one major factor to why Muppet Babies was a thing, as since it was the 80s, we all know that cartoons were mainly motivated by one thing.
Merchandising.
Merchandising? What's that?
Merchandising.
Yes, the 80s for cartoons was mostly about synergy. Every single cartoon had to have a toy line, so kids watching the show could have incentive to buy cool toys based on these characters. Some would say this was not the best time for cartoons, as it was mostly just fixated on cartoons being products. And while there have been shows that even hold well on their own outside of the merch, let's be real. A successful cartoon was mostly reliant on how many toys they could make for it. The Muppet Babies was no exception, as there has always been a ton of merchandise and ties into the series, and it actually does make sense. Why have a little regular Kermit doll when you can get a cuter, smaller little Kermit wearing a sailor suit? It was a money-making machine. So it eventually decided that the Muppet Babies would get a cartoon as well, airing on CBS. And being worked by, of all studios, Marvel. Yes.
Avengers!
That Marvel. Weird to think about today, but this was before Marvel was as big as they are now. But why else make a Muppet Babies cartoon outside of merchandise? Well, I think partially because, as we'll establish later on, there was a lot more done in the Muppet Babies in terms of set pieces, so animation was an easier way to make this possible. As far as why they're babies, I think that was to make the Muppets also a little more kid-friendly. Now, you might be thinking, wait, aren't the Muppets already made for babies? Well, if you're one of those fools who just assumes that anything animation or puppet related is automatically made for kids, then I got news for you, pal. Because...
The answer is yes and no.
What do I mean? Well, The Muppets was never seen as super bad for kids. It was still a family-friendly property, ultimately speaking. But when talking particularly about The Muppet Show, it wasn't necessarily made for kids in mind. It's pretty similar to how The Flintstones came to be, as both shows initially aired on prime time, as these shows were more meant to appeal to older audiences with a focus on more adult themes and humor that might be more inclined for adults. Nothing super inappropriate by today's standards, but The Muppet Show did have a bit more of an edge to compare to something like Sesame Street, that's for sure. I mean, the original pilot of The Muppet Show was called Sex in Violence, so there was clearly an intention that this was more for older audiences than the series with Big Bird. But much like the Flintstones, once there was a realization that kids liked these shows, then there was more of an emphasis to make them more family friendly. The Muppets were still family friendly during then, but it was mainly the Muppet Babies that kinda had them start becoming more as part of a kids franchise. In the 90s, we got a lot more Muppet-related stuff that was geared specifically for kids, that didn't have quite the adult edge that the earlier Muppet projects had. Which is why I'm always weirded out when people complain about something like The Muppets 2015 feeling too adult, when in actuality, it was refreshing to see a Muppet series geared more towards an older audience again for a change. However, I do feel there is a time and place for more child-friendly Muppet-related content. After all, Kermit is on Sesame Street, so it'd be weird if he wasn't in more stuff made specifically for kids. Plus, it ended up working well because Muppet Babies was a pretty big hit. So much so that after this series, more cartoon shows decided to go the route of making kiddie versions of existing franchises. Tom and Jerry Kids, Flintstone Kids, Yo Yogi, Baby Looney Tunes, Jungle Cubs, Madagascar A Little Wild, the list goes on. It was an easy way to make money by making baby or kids version of popular characters that we still see a lot of today. Even if a show isn't primarily focused on that, how many characters have we seen where the main popularity or appeal comes from the fact they're a cute mini version of an already iconic character? So it makes sense to why Muppet Babies set this phenomenon. This is also why it's all the more confusing why Muppet Babies, despite their influence in pop culture, barely anyone talks about the series itself. You'd think there would be with all the discussion of iconic 80s cartoons from a lot of nostalgic YouTubers, as Muppet Babies kind of are in the leagues of other popular 80s hits like Transformers or Ninja Turtles. I mean, why else were they in that Cartoon All-Stars special crossover where they team up with DuckTales, Bugs Bunny, and other cartoon characters about the dangers of marijuana?
There's a myriad wild and wonderful ways to say no. No thanks. No way.
Better learn a few and take 'em wherever you go.
No thanks. No sir.
If your pal says let's get high.
Of course it had to be the Muppet Babies, and not the regular Muppets, because, well, quite frankly, I don't believe any of these characters at their older age have never tried drugs of any sort of capacity. So that said, what about the Muppet Babies themselves? Like, is it a genuinely good show that has aged well? I say, for what it is, it's not bad. It definitely has a feeling of an 80s show, and despite that, there's a lot that could be led to believe that this series isn't all that good in the vein of other 80s cartoons. Muppet Babies does at least feel exactly like it's supposed to be in a decent way. I think now it's finally time to really dive into what made the Muppet Babies the recognizable series it is today by talking about the show itself. So, what's the main premise behind the Muppet Babies? Well, outside of the fact that it's about the Muppets as babies, the series takes place in this area called the nursery. Unknown where exactly it is, but essentially this is where all the major Muppet characters hang around as little toddlers. The person who is in charge of this place is this woman that the babies refer to as Nanny. We never know who exactly she is, In fact, we never even see her face. We never know if she's either a really beautiful woman, some old witch, a weird dragon creature, or a Muppet herself. She was made to be faceless as a way for the babies to look up at the parental figures of this world. However, given that Nanny is the main one in charge and ultimately has to be the one to check in on the babies, we never exactly find out why she's the one raising the kids. We're never explained if this is just some daycare the Muppet Babies are taken to, or if Nanny is raising the kids herself. My theory is she's some distant relative of Jim Henson, who created the babies through his experiments, and while trying to pitch these babies to others that they'll be very successful adults, Nanny is the one who watches over them for the time being. When Nanny isn't around, the babies have their own little adventures where they go through many different conflicts and scenarios that are enhanced by the power of their imagination. So basically, most cases, they play with their imagination so hard that we see what they're imagining, as the scenarios they are thinking about are playing out in real time. Now, the whole idea of a show where babies are playing and using their imagination, and us, the audience, sees what exactly the babies are imagining, sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Some of you might be thinking, isn't there another animated series that came out after this series that uses the whole babies having adventures through their imagination quite prominently? Well, to answer your question, yes, this does sound similar to... Yeah, Rugrats was another big hit in the 90s that had a set focus on babies. And there were plenty of episodes where we see the babies play their imaginary scenario in real time. Now, that being mentioned, is this going to be another potential ripoff not many were aware of? Did Klasky, Kupo, and Nickelodeon rip off the spirit of Jim Henson to create a show of their own nature that got bigger than his series? Well, not exactly. This is mainly because while they both share quite a few similarities, these shows do stand out much better between one another when comparing the two. The biggest similarity is the whole imaginary world set pieces, but both series do that concept in different ways, as the Rugrats wasn't as reliant on the imaginary worlds in comparison to the Muppet Babies. There were plenty of episodes that had that, but they did a lot more than just that. There were a lot more episodes of the Rugrats that didn't have any sort of imagination sequence, and we just see a set piece or scenario that the babies would go through, and the appeal was seeing how a baby would react in this situation. The Muppet Babies was limited in just taking place at the nursery. That's it. And practically everything they interact with or the scenario they would get into would be a figment of imagining a fun playtime for them. The Rugrats definitely went to a lot more places in the series throughout. Not to mention, certain aspects had bigger roles in the Rugrats compared to Muppet Babies, namely the adults. Even though the Muppet Babies can actually talk to Nanny, she's just there as a parental figure who just checks in on them. That's about it. Or the adults in the Rugrats definitely had a lot more character to them, with being standout personalities. And of course, we actually see their faces. It's actually one of the main reasons why Rugrats does hold up today for me, as these adults practically make the show due to how hilarious some of their situations are.
I'll bring the Monopoly set. Howard, I'd be honored to have you as my partner.
Oh, wait a minute. You called me a fathead?
So, at the end of the day, I wouldn't call Rugrats a ripoff of the Muppet Babies, especially when you take into consideration these reasons. The whole idea of babies or even kids playing with an imaginary world for playtime where we see it through the kids' perspective was a been done idea prior to Muppet Babies, so they weren't the ones to think of this first. Though more importantly, the big thing that makes them different, when you get right down to it, both shows had different appeals to them. The main draw of the Rugrats was that it was a show about babies having their own little adventures, and we see the world from their perspective. The main appeal of the Muppet Babies was that it was a bunch of iconic characters, this time being the Muppets, as cutesy babies, which I guess no better time to talk about these Muppet characters than now, as the cast of characters were a major player into the show's success. So let's see how their baby counterparts are reflective of these famous Muppet characters. Starting with the face of the brand, Kermit the Frog.
I won't tell if you won't.
Kermit serves as kind of the central character of the show, or at the very least, the main leader of the group. It makes perfect sense, since in the Muppet Show and movies, he's essentially that character anyway, being the one to take charge and run the operations. And much like in the Muppet Show, he's the generous, yet also nervous team leader who definitely is prone to panic, but also is a genuinely supportive friend to others. I guess there are a few key differences as compared to older Kermit. He doesn't get as mad as much as he usually does. Though the real difference in the series is that they kinda emphasize more him being an adventurer as a baby. Kermit is kind of that in other Muppet things, but I always feel like he's a little restrained on it. Like he's kind of more often hesitant on going on major dangers out of protection of his friends and himself. Hell, he barely is able to harm anyone as it is.
I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in violence.
So this Kermit does seem a lot more eager to get into danger. This series definitely makes him to be the Tommy Pickles of the group when it comes to being the leader of all these babies. And okay, I promise you I won't be constantly comparing the series to the Rugrats.
There's nothing cool about a fool on drugs.
Oh, and I should probably mention this now, but that's not Jim Henson doing the voice of Kermit this time. In fact, none of the original Muppeteer actors returned to reprise their roles as these characters. This was for a number of different reasons, but the main one being was because the likes of Jim Henson, Frank Oz, Dave Goelz, Richard Hunt, and Jerry Nelson were all busy on other Muppet-related projects of their own at that time. Their work on Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, and also the numerous movies Jim was making made it so they didn't really have much time to lend their voices to a big series like this. But it's not too big of a deal because admittedly, it is understandable that different actors would play younger versions of the Muppets. I mean, these Muppets haven't hit puberty yet in the show, so of course they're gonna sound different. Fortunately, they got some very talented voice actors to portray these young characters. The voice of Kermit in the series is done by the one and only Frank Welker. Yeah, you know, Megatron, Scooby-Doo, Fred, Dr. Claw, and so many others. Certainly one of the most prolific voice actors out there. As far as Kermit impressions go, this version of Kermit is a good imitation of Jim's version, just at a higher pitch. This goes for pretty much all of the Muppets here, as Miss Piggy is actually voiced by someone who identifies as a girl this time. Though Piggy in this show is also how you would expect. She's a total diva who loves attention. She's very much a girly girl who's into the typical unicorns, hearts, romance, and whatever feminine thing you can think of, being the main character to be there to appeal to any girl watching the show. She also has a massive crush on Kermit, and also can have a bit of a temper. Again, just like the regular Miss Piggy.
Gee, Piggy's a little heavier than I thought.
What did you say, Kermit?
Those are the nicest shoes you ever bought.
Why? Thank you, Kermit.
Phew.
So this is another pretty spot-on character. She's definitely not a character you want to get on her bad side. And the voice actress, Laurie O'Brien, certainly replicates the original character very well in her performance portraying the younger version of Piggy. Next up is everyone's favorite furry funny man, Fozzie Bear. Fozzie's role in the show is the comic relief, the jokester of the group, in the same way he constantly cracks jokes in the original Muppet Show. Definitely the main character who tries to lighten the mood at various points, much like a typical comedic character of an 80s cartoon. The main running gag is that the response to Fozzie's jokes are arguably more brutal this time around. Where the Muppet Show just had Statler and Waldorf mocking his antics, in this series, Fozzie is constantly booed and thrown tomatoes at.
What did the seven dwarfs say when someone asked them what color snow was? Give up? They said, isn't Snow White? Get it? Seven dwarfs, Snow White, waka waka waka. Whoa!
It's crazy. Nowhere is safe for Fozzie, as anything will hate his joke no matter what.
Waka waka waka!
But you gotta give it to Fozzie. Most comedians today, when faced with backlash from a joke, would go on Twitter to rant about how today's generation don't understand comedy and are offended at everything. But Fozzie, nah, he takes it like a champ and just accepts the hate his jokes get. It might still be a bit much, since his jokes are more so lame than really offensive or anything.
Gee, Fozzie, I guess rules or no rules, a bad joke is a bad joke.
Now we get to Gonzo the Great, one of my personal favorite Muppets. He's been known as the strange weirdo in the Muppets who's strange, but also has ambition as a daredevil. Here, it's not that much different, as Gonzo still has those character traits big time. There's a lot of jokes at the expense of him being an outcast, but also is ultimately accepted among the group for his sense of passion. Oh, and while I mentioned that Piggy is voiced by a girl in this show, they also have girls voicing male characters for a change, as Gonzo here is voiced by Russi Taylor, famous voice actress known for Minnie Mouse and also Donald's nephews, which, if you really listen in, you can hear the similarities between the voices for them and Gonzo.
Drugs? Oh, bad news, Michael. Actually, this is just one artist's conception.
She still manages to portray the right inflections of the character well in her performance, coming across as that charming weirdo he is. The one odd thing about this series in terms of Gonzo is one aspect that never really was a thing initially, but in this series, Gonzo has a major crush on Miss Piggy.
How about whispering some sweet nothings in my ear, Piggy Pie? How about if I stuff some sourdough in your ear, Noodle Nose?
That's something that wasn't much of a thing in the original Muppet show, partially because it was well established that Camilla the chicken was the main love interest for Gonzo. This series, however, it still mostly has Piggy and Kermit being a thing, but it's usually Piggy who's crushing on him, while Kermit is nervous. Meanwhile, Gonzo wants a piece of that bacon, as he constantly tries to swoon in on Miss Piggy and is eyeing for her attention. It's odd to see it so prominent when it wasn't much of a thing in the original Muppet show. I mean, I guess Gonzo does have a thing for farm animals in general, so maybe it's not that weird. I think it's more so weird when you consider both characters have their love interests set out for them in the series prior. So what makes of Camilla? Well, she is in the series, weirdly enough. Kinda. Not so much a chicken version, but Gonzo does have a little plush toy of Camilla that would usually act like a real character when the plot needs her to be. Though again, very few and far between. But those are the real main differences of Gonzo, because he's still the great lovable weirdo we all know and love. Now it's time to talk about Rowlf the Dog, and not really too much to say about him here. He was always the chilled, relaxed dog who loves to strike up a good conversation, and plays the piano. Here it's pretty much the same. Rowlf's main passion is music on the show, and he serves a lot when it comes to musical talent. He still retains that chilled attitude, always expected from the character, and voice actress Kate Lee does a good job replicating the character's essence.
Just vote for Rowlf the Dog for president of the nursery!
Gee, Rolf, I hate to say this, but you're the only dog in the nursery.
Oh.
The only real difference is that he wears a diaper, because I'm assuming Nanny doesn't want to clean up Rowlf's remains on her yard or hallways, as the Muppets here aren't potty trained yet, I'm assuming. Next in line is one of the most popular Muppets and main star of the Electric Mayhem, Animal. Of course he was going to be included on this show. He's certainly one of the most popular and recognizable Muppet characters. He doesn't play the drums too often in this show, but he is kind of the character you would expect if you hear the word baby animal. He's a very wild card of a character that's rambunctious and hyper. He is seemingly the youngest of the babies, crawling more often and only speaking in short bursts of sentences compared to the other babies. Oh, and that voice and laugh is something to behold. And technically speaking, Animal was voiced by two actors. The first being the one and only Howie Mandel in the first 2 seasons. You know, the guy from Deal or No Deal. Also voiced a few other characters on the show. Voice of Gizmo, Bobby of Bobby's World, and also one of the most OCD celebrities you will ever see. Seriously, look it up. He does a decent job giving the character a distinct voice. Though, for whatever reason, they replaced him in Season 3 with Dave Coulier, who you might recognize in other roles where he makes impressions.
Hello, Cinderella.
That's right, it's Joey from Full House. Yeah, those impressions he did on the show weren't just for the character. He did do some legitimate voice acting, as I would hope Full House gave him more opportunities to do that. However, both actors don't sound that much different between one another, as I can barely tell this character was voiced by 2 different dudes.
Animal cute. What? Sorry. Gabbo. Whoa.
It doesn't change the fact that there is one thing that isn't surprising about Baby Animal. If you know the Muppets as well as I do, it's something that's definitely apparent when it comes to this character. And that's the fact that Animal is a little shit.
Hey!
Yeah, every 80s cartoon had to have some form of troublemaker that's cutesy, but also tries to mess things up for the characters in some way. Animal is no exception to this role, as he's constantly making a ruckus, eating other people's food, and just all around does whatever the hell he wants, not giving a care of who he pisses off. Though at the end of the day, everyone still loves him for it. I mean, this is Animal we're talking about. I think the Muppets got used to his antics at this point. Oh, and every episode ends with a small bit of him saying goodbye to the audience as a capper to the series.
Bye-bye.
Not much else to say, so let's move on.
Bye-bye.
Animal, I'm not done talking about the characters yet.
Sorry.
It's all good, as finally I saved the most interesting character for last. Or should I say characters? As the next one we're going to talk about is good old Scooter. Of course, Scooter was the main helper around the Muppet Show, and I actually don't know for sure what he's supposed to be. In the series, he's set to be a gopher, but not that kind of gopher, cause, well, he looks nothing like one. But a gopher in stagehand terms, where they have to be the one to go get certain items for the crew. I think he's supposed to be a human, but who knows for sure. For all I know, he could be some sort of lizard man. Either way, he's in this series. And while he does serve as a good supporting character as he usually does, the series does add some things to his character. For one thing, this series sort of brought the whole thing that Scooter is kind of a computer expert. His whole thing in the series is that he has a super powerful computer that can do almost anything, and he serves as kind of the Poindexter type, who's incredibly smart. You kinda gotta have this sort of tech expert of 80s character tropes in some capacity, so Scooter seemed like he fit that model pretty well. I mean, if you look at the dude, he does look like the kind of person who would help you out with your desktop at Best Buy. Why else did he get that job at Google for a bit in Muppets 2011? However, that's not the only thing they added for Scooter, as there's one other thing this series added for this character. Oh yes, it's time we talk about a rather notable aspect to the series. That's right, it's time to talk about Skeeter. Now, what's the deal with Skeeter? Some of you are probably wondering, who the hell is Skeeter? Well, in this series, they decided to give Scooter a twin named Skeeter. Not Skeeter Valentine of Doug, or Cousin Skeeter, but Skeeter of Muppet Babies. So what's her deal? Well, she was a character made exclusively for the show. But the real kicker is, Muppet Babies is her only real contribution to the Muppets franchise. She not only made her debut in the show, but has never really been addressed too much outside of this series itself, which is so odd when you consider that she is a sibling to a major character. So many wonder, what's the deal with Skeeter? Did she die? Did she go on her own separate ways? Or is there some dark secret regarding her character, making her an outcast of the Muppets? Well, the best way to go about this is to discuss why she's included in the first place. See, the writers wanted to be more inclusive and diverse with this cast by adding another female character to the show. Because, let's face it, when it comes to the Muppets, for a long time, it was considered kind of an all-boys club, as there's not a lot of female representation when it comes to Muppet characters. It has gotten a little better since with the additions to Sesame Street, and even other female Muppet characters. However, it is still mostly male-dominated. As for female Muppet characters, you really got Miss Piggy and... yeah, that's practically it. Any other Muppet female character never really got that popular, as they were either just another type of animal like Camilla, or just a lesser known Muppet character that never really caught on. So I could see them making a new character because they didn't really have much options. I mean, are there really going to be a demand for a baby Wanda or a baby Hilda? That's a deep cut right there, because I don't think she's barely a favorite Muppet from season 1. So yeah, all fine and dandy to why they would add someone like Skeeter. My only real thing regarding her being added to the show for female representation is this. What was wrong with Janice?
Wow, like I'm Janice on the guitar? For sure.
Yeah, Janice. Of all the major Muppet characters, she's the main female character next to Miss Piggy that's well known. So why didn't they add her? She was a good female rep for the Muppets that could have been added to the show. Well, that's the weird part of this series, because she is in the show. She does appear in one episode in the final season.
Hi, everybody.
Pretty late on the mark if you ask me. But the other weird part is that in this episode, they revealed that she is actually a bit older than the babies. So I guess that's why she wasn't added, because she's canonically older than the Muppet Babies. Very odd, but I guess that makes sense, even if it's weird to consider that Janice is older than the other characters of this crazy franchise.
Look, Mother, it's my life, okay? So if I want to live on a beach and walk around naked...
Though I think the other factor to why Skeeter was added to the show comes from when you really look at Skeeter herself as a character personality-wise. In this series, she's the athletic one of the group. Her passions are doing any types of sports or physical activity. She serves as kind of a tomboy character, which, yeah, that's part of the reason why she was added. When an 80s series, or hell, even animated series in general, want to have a diverse cast, if they add another female character, they usually try their best to make them stand out from the other main female character. Usually the main one is a very girly girl, and is into stuff like fashion, makeup, pretty things, and would have their favorite color be, well, pink. So to contrast that, they'll have a character who's a girl that's a bit more edgy, being not as much into cutesy things, but being into a lot of stuff that's the opposite of that. It's definitely worth considering here, as Skeeter serves as a contrast to Miss Piggy, who is the exact girly girl type in this show. So you do see them pair up a lot. Though this contrast does work well with Scooter, since Scooter is a tech nerd who's into computers. So his opposite has to be the one who's into sports and athletics.
Billions of brothers in the world, and I get the one who can't drive.
It's just so weird that Skeeter never really made another appearance outside of the show officially. The most she ever did was she would be in stuff related to Muppet Kids, the kind of pseudo sequel to Muppet Babies in the form of books and computer games, and she would appear as an adult in comic form, but that's about it. She never made an appearance in any later Muppet show or movie, not even as a cameo or a reference, though I would honestly welcome if they ever decide to bring her back. she would be a neat character to have. Maybe have the older version be like a full-on yoga instructor or sports person that would work very well with the Muppets. So if they ever want to bring back Skeeter as an adult for a future Muppet project, I say they should go for it, cause why the hell not? Though that's really about it for the main cast of the Muppet Babies, which is a slight bummer for this series. Cause one downside is that it is limited on which Muppet characters actually show up in the show. Certain Muppets who are kinda popular and a big deal don't appear in the show at all. Characters like Sweet'em, Sam the Eagle, and the other Electric Mayhem members aside Janice and Animal don't appear in this show at all, which is a bit of a disappointment. Though there are other Muppet characters that do make reoccurring or one-episode appearances on this show. I mentioned earlier that Janice appears in one episode in the final season, but there's another famous Muppet that appears in a total of 2 episodes. Kermit's nephew, Robin, actually makes an appearance in the show. Now, you might be wondering, wait, how is Robin here? Isn't he significantly younger than Kermit? Should he even be born at this point? Well, they found a way to get Robin interacting with the baby version of his own uncle. That's right, he appears in this show as a fetus.
Gosh.
Okay, technically he's a tadpole in this. And he's the small little character that the babies look after for a few episodes. Not really much else to say. He's there to be cute, much like the original Robin, except he's even smaller, which is destined to make him even more sickeningly cute. Is there anything else they could have done to make people not resist this small little frog?
Boy, what a big frog! I wonder if I will look like that when I grow up.
They gave him the most adorable little voice, oh my god! But enough about Robin, as there were more Muppet characters that made even more appearances in this show. One pair of characters that made regular appearances are the duo of Dr. Bunsen Honeydew and his assistant Beaker. These two were very prominent in the original Muppet Show, with Bunsen being the wise inventor and poor old Beaker being the one to participate in his experiments. It's not too much different here, as they serve as fun little characters to interact with one another as babies, though they only appear in the occasional episodes, as I guess they didn't live at this nursery house.
Thanks for inviting us, Nanny. But we better be going now. Come on, Beaker.
Where do you guys need to go? It never made sense to me why Bunsen and Beaker were barely on this show. I thought everyone loved these guys. You know how many people I know who don't even care about the Muppets that much love Beaker and his small way with words? Maybe they weren't in the show too much because maybe Beaker's meeps at a higher pitch might be a bit annoying for some adults. Another major Muppet character that makes an appearance on the show is...
Look who's here, kids. It's Bean Bunny.
Hi, Beanie.
Hi, everybody.
Bean the Bunny? Of all the characters they could have picked, they picked Bean the Bunny? If you don't know who Bean is, he's the guy from A Christmas Carol.
Brightly shone the moon that night.
But he was also fairly prominent in the Muppets in the 80s, with his first appearance being one of Jim Henson's lesser-known specials, The Tale of the Bunny Picnic. Since then, Bean has made numerous appearances, including a fairly big role in Muppet Vision 3D. In the final 2 seasons of Muppet Babies, he does appear in a decent amount of episodes, but it's odd to see him make the cut. He's kind of relatively obscure when it comes to Muppet characters, as he's not really used much anymore today. His whole gimmick as a part of the Muppets was that he was a cutesy Muppet whose main trait is that he was adorable. And it's pretty much the same boat here. Everyone in the nursery are often charmed by Bean's naiveness and cutesy appearance. I think Jim Henson and his team thought this character was going to catch on more because of the cute factor, but he never really caught on. It's a shame. I guess the Muppet that was destined to be the cutest Muppet just couldn't compare to the likes of someone like Elmo. Not even a baby version can get him more popular.
You know, a moment like this could affect some bunnies permanently.
The last 2 characters that are used in this series that made regular appearances were, believe it or not, Statler and Waldorf. Don't worry, they're not babies in this one. That would add way too much confusion. They're full-grown adults, and the only ones in the entire show that regularly appear where you actually see their faces. They appear in the final 2 seasons of Muppet Babies as recurring characters, and are referred by Uncle Statler and Waldorf. Of all the Muppet characters, they're probably the most different from their original counterparts, as in this, they're not really as harsh to the Muppets in this series when it comes to heckling them. In fact, they rarely heckle them at all, as really they're here to join in on some of the babies' adventures. They help the babies learn about a few things, and just go in on whatever fun they're having. I guess it makes sense for them to be like this. I mean, they would come across as major dicks if they were just mocking children. Well, okay, they're already dicks, but I think more so if they did this to small children. Yet they still get a few disses to the babies in the show, at least.
Frog, you got a great career in front of you.
Yeah, and a giant snake behind you.
Huh?
Made you look.
Oh boy.
So that's basically it for the cast of characters that the Muppet Babies has to offer, when it comes to anyone significant at least. A few new faces, a lot of old faces, but a cast that still managed to stay faithful to what these Muppet characters are like personality-wise. Minor changes aside, they still put up a good Muppet show. Which I think now it's time to start talking more about the kind of episodes and actual scenarios these characters actually participate in. Muppet Babies, like most TV shows of that era, does follow a bit of a formula, as in every episode, there are certain things that occur. The Muppet Babies have some sort of conflict. Nanny comes in to check in on them or inform the babies on certain things, and then the babies would have their own little adventures, fueled by their imaginations. Every episode would include characters having certain bits or actions they would do, from Fozzie telling a joke, Rowlf's piano playing, animals' antics, you get the gist. Rather than talking about a bunch of single episodes of the series, like I usually do, I think it's better to discuss the kind of plots that appear in this series. As throughout the show, you witness certain types of plots that appear, as these characters often deal with similar types of scenarios in each episode. Most of the time it's usually something simple, like the babies wanting to clean up and do nice things for Nanny, they have to make sure to be quiet so they don't wake up their neighbors, or they want to have some sort of competition. This usually results in them conjuring up some random scenarios where they end up in a different location and pretend they're there, and see them interact through their perspective. Other times we do get different types of scenarios that, while they do often deal with their imagination at one point, they're more focused on one character having sort of a conflict. Like there's an episode where maybe one of them has to learn about sharing with one another. Episodes where one of them feels left out and wants to fit in some way, or learning how to overcome some sort of fear that they have. All of these are pretty typical of what you would see in a show designed for little kids, basically teaching them about certain morals and practices to get along with people more. It's all simple and cute stuff and adds to this show's educational factor. But they also teach kids more than just morals. There's also a lot of episodes where Nanny would inform the babies about certain historical figures, what certain places in other parts of the world are like, or just how certain things or places operate on a daily basis. Then the babies would see the things they learn about pan out in their imagination, and they fulfilled certain roles as well. Like Kermit would become president, or Gonzo would be this famous explorer, or other cases, they all basically pitch in to recreate a certain kind of place, like a movie theater or a library. This stuff adds to the show having a lot of stuff for kids to learn. And they don't do a bad job here either. They manage to do it with enough humor and character that I think it's enough to get kids engaged with it. Another common scenario I notice is sometimes there's a guest character that's just there for one episode, where the babies have to either watch them, show them around the nursery, or just help them out in any particular way. They range from characters like the previously mentioned Robin, to other random characters like this pigeon who needs help delivering messages, or this koala that the babies think is an alien. It does lead to some variety in terms of who they might interact with, whether that character is actually just characterized more by their imagination or not. Though I noticed the most common plot thread that tends to happen is, more often than not, the babies would just retell other stories. If not for the full episode, there's at least a good handful of moments where they start reenacting a famous fairy tale bit, with every Muppet fulfilling a role for each character. It fits well given the Muppets need to perform and put on a show, and since it's mostly a show geared towards younger audiences, a lot of these are classic fairy tales you would expect. They parody stuff like Peter Pan, Snow White, Cinderella, and so on and so forth. However, it's not just the typical fairy tales and nursery rhymes they recreate. There are episodes where they focus on a certain type of story. Like there's an episode that focuses on classic poems, there's an episode where they focus on comic strips, and even one where they talk about ancient myth.
What? Myth!
Yeah.
Hell, sometimes it's not even just parodies or recreations of classic stories. A lot of times, we see movie parodies on the show. Stuff like Superman, Indiana Jones, and I can't count the amount of times they parody Star Wars alone on this show. It adds to the Muppets' strong sense of pop culture, and to be fair, they've done this kind of stuff plenty of times on the regular Muppet Show, so it's not really an issue here. Also, much like the regular Muppets, this series has a ton of music, and every episode of this series features a song of sorts. This seems to be a trend with shows geared towards younger kids, where they have to have songs appearing in the series, for better or for worse. Given that it is the Muppets, I don't think it's too inappropriate for them to sing in this.
Well, my mama said...
Hold it! Turn up all the spotlights, let everybody see. I know what you really want. Me.
Though I will say, these songs are just okay. These are songs made more so for little kids in mind. They're not bad, but there's nothing about them that stands too much. Usually it's a song that deals with a topic of the episode, or a character sings about the lesson they need to learn. Stuff like that, which makes it very much a typical show for younger audiences. These songs are fine, but they're not the best work to come out of a Muppet project. There are plenty of regular Muppet songs. Hell, even Sesame Street songs I listened to first before re-listening to a song from the Muppet Babies. The biggest thing that really stands out about the music is that it does deal with different genres, at least, tackling all different forms of music given the episode's theme, though mostly sort of a doo-wop sound to them, mostly evident in the theme song, which is easily the most standout song in the series for obvious reasons. It stands out so much that you might forget that this song sounds very similar to another recognizable song from a popular musical of that era. One thing that does make this stand out compared to something like The Muppet Show, however, is the visual look of the show. It's now time to talk a bit of the animation of Muppet Babies, namely because this is the main thing we have to associate when it comes to the Muppets being animated characters. And it's odd to see. It's weird seeing these characters that we're so used to seeing in live action as puppets from the torso up in animation form, where we see their legs. And this won't be the last time we see the Muppets in a 2D animated style. To get further of what I'm talking about with the animation, I should mention the studios that worked on this series. The first 3 seasons were actually done by Toei Animation, as in, yes, the same Toei Animation studio that has worked on some of the most beloved anime of all time, working on shows like Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, which I guess this would technically make the original Muppet Babies a Japanese anime. So again, this was only for the first couple of seasons. There was an issue this animation studio had when the show was first worked on, as during the Muppet Babies' initial run, there was a very short period where they were actually paired with another show called Little Muppet Monsters. This was a skit show similar to other Muppet shows where the Muppet characters, old and new, would hang out and do some fun activities. The interesting thing to note is that this series featured its own animated bits, done by Toei, this time with the actual Muppets as adults. There would be numerous stories dealing with these iconic characters, such as a detective mystery with Kermit and Fozzie, and Pigs in Space. And let me tell you, this shit might be weirder than anything that appeared in the Muppet Babies.
Listen, Newty, how about Roo and Wah talk this over? Pig to Pollywog.
Blast the pigs with your frog rays and throw them into outer space.
Relax, he's bluffing. What'd I tell you?
Ribbit.
Though this show led to a bit of an issue, as animation takes a lot more time than puppetry when it comes to production, meaning that Toei Animation couldn't keep up with the production animating these segments for the show. And that was especially apparent when the team behind the live action segments were already done. Thus, it was actually through Jim Henson himself the series was axed after only like 3 episodes airing, and decided to just stick with Muppet Babies as its own show moving forward. I don't want to get into this series further, but Little Muppet Monster is an interesting project, even if the whole idea of animated Muppet sounds weird to you. I think it's odd because puppetry is often considered animation onto itself, so to see practically live action cartoon characters in real life actually become cartoon characters is a bit jarring. Though we don't see it often outside of these shows, as the only other times we've seen the Muppets in animation would be a few segments on Sesame Street and even a Fraggle Rock animated series. Strange or not, these animated Muppet segments were the reasons why this show is still remembered. And at least Muppet Babies throw them a bone by actually having a bit of the animation from Muppet Monsters into the final episode of Muppet Babies, so that's neat at least. Toei would then eventually part ways with Jim Henson past season 4, as they would then get replaced by ACOM for the rest of the series. Fortunately, ACOM is not one to shrug off either, as they're an animation studio in Korea responsible for a number of animated projects that came during and after Muppet Babies. They worked on stuff like Transformers, Animaniacs, Batman the Animated Series, so they're no slouch to animation either. If I were to compare this two studios' animation, I would honestly say that the ACOM work is a lot better. Not to rag on Toei's work, but noticing the first season's animation was a lot choppier in movement, and I noticed a lot more errors with random color and side changes throughout their run of the series. I will say that the colors pop out a little more in Toei's run, but other than that, I do think ACOM looks a bit better. This isn't a hate on the animation of either studio. This was a different period where a lot of animated shows in the 80s had to cut corners just to meet deadlines. As far as 80s cartoons go, I say Muppet Babies is one of the better looking ones. It's odd to see these characters in animation though, and even weirder when they include designs of characters not based on anything in the Muppet shows. Seriously, some of these characters are very weird, and only something you would see in the 80s in terms of designs. Ironically enough, some of these characters look like they came out of that weird Felix the Cat movie that came out in the 80s. Though hey, they make for some interesting designs to say the least. Though like I said, this looks pretty okay for 80s standards. Although, at least from what you can tell, as you probably noticed by now, the quality of episodes of the Muppet Babies I have been showing you has been all over the place. I'm sure you noticed that a lot of these episodes look like they've been recorded off of TV. And you'd be right. This is because it is admittedly hard to find really good footage of the Muppet Babies. And that's because this series never really got an official release on DVD or streaming for that matter. In fact, Muppet Babies in general, outside of the archives of the internet, hasn't really aired on TV since probably the late 90s at the earliest. I'm probably the last generation to really have seen this show air on TV, as I mostly remember this show airing on Nickelodeon as part of Nick Jr. when I was really little. The Muppet Babies had been on different channels throughout the years, with CBS being their main affiliate, and would later be shown on other networks like Nickelodeon, and even Disney Channel in some countries. I still grew up with a few episodes of the show, as most of my exposure to the Muppet Babies has really come through a little thing called VHS tapes. So, you know we're really going way back now. In fact, My official introduction to the Muppet Babies comes from possibly the most obscure and niche Muppet-related thing I will probably ever bring up in a video ever.
Yes, I can. If I believe in myself, then there's nothing I can't do. Yes, I can.
What is this? Why, this is the Yes I Can series. A series of VHS tapes that were made in the 90s as part of Jim Henson's preschool collection. To cut to the chase, this was essentially just repackaged episodes of Muppet Babies. However, there are some distinct things about these videos. They don't have the typical Muppet Babies theme song, instead have a new song featuring Kermit and Robin. The episodes more or less stay the same, with the only real difference is that in the beginning, end, and in between each episodes, there's a few live action segments with Kermit and Robin. Basically, before each episode, there's a little conflict that occurs that Robin is dealing with, to which Kermit would pull over aside and say,
"Alright, listen here, you little shit. I'm tired of you being an incompetent little prick, so I'm gonna tell you about the time me and my friends learned not to be jackasses back when I had to wear Pampers!"
And then the episode plays. I do remember really enjoying these videos as my introductions to the Muppet Babies. I enjoyed them so much, I actually had all of them. Yep, all 3 of them. Look, I said I had all of them. I didn't say there were many. Though there were other VHS releases of the Muppet Babies I did see as a kid. But for a while, my exposure to this show was still very limited, given that this show didn't air that much as I got older, and never got any further DVD or any sort of release compared to the likes of Sesame Street, Fraggle Rock, and even now with the Muppet Show at this point. Now, why is that the case with the Muppet Babies? Why is it so hard to find any sort of official release of the series in higher quality? You would think for a show that so many people remember and gave way to such a big trend for media and has been such a big part of the Muppets' identity for quite some time now, would be easy to access for audience to watch. So why is it that Muppet Babies is so hard to find? Is there an official answer to this? Well, through my research, I couldn't find any official word to why this series hasn't been properly reintroduced, but honestly, I think I know a good reason to why. As not only do I have a good feeling to why it's the reason it hasn't aired, but it's probably also the reason why we will never get a proper release of the Muppet Babies. How do I know this? Well, honestly, you can just make an assumption from watching the show, because the reason why Muppet Babies hasn't been re-released is because of moments like this.
Make a silly face!
Wow, look out. Ooh.
And just a heads up, no, this is not me splicing a bunch of random clips during this moment. This is actually how the episode plays out. One of the most well-known aspects of Muppet Babies that I had yet to mention is that this show uses live-action footage. Now, live-action footage being spliced into cartoons is nothing new, and we still see it today. What makes this so weird is the amount of live-action footage used in this series, and what exactly they use, because it isn't just limited to random stock or public domain footage. The Muppet Babies use live-action footage from practically everything. Any movie, any TV show, or anything that was pre-1991, there's a strong chance you will see a clip of it featured in the Muppet Babies. The clips can range from anything from nature footage or plays from popular sports games to major movies and TV shows as well. They use clips from everything from Ghostbusters,
The Piggy Dogger!
The Three Stooges,
Gee, how did those guys get into Nanny's kitchen anyway?
Casablanca,
He's looking at you, kids.
The Peanuts,
Nice catch!
and you'd think they would just reference Star Wars up front. No, not just that. They include clips of the movies outright.
Musical aliens!
At least this was made before the special editions by George Lucas. Either way, they were able to get clips from pretty much anything. Well, almost anything.
Hey, you're not Batman!
Batman? Are you nuts? Warner Brothers wanted $2 million for a 3-second film clip.
Ooh. Boy, I wonder what they paid Bugs Bunny.
Not well enough considering who's running Warner Brothers now. Which, while I'm at it, release Coyote vs. Acme, you dummies. Anyway, that does beg the question, why did they do this to begin with? Well, it was to add to the babies' imaginations with the live action footage, to sort of cut costs and also make the imagination parts of their episodes stand out. They were able to get footage pretty easily, as this was thanks to Jim's relationship with directors like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. Hence why you see a lot of Indiana Jones and Star Wars stuff in particular with this show. Regardless, the amount of clips they use here is still impressive and unprecedented because of how many different shows and movies they included. Some of them I imagine weren't too hard, like there's an episode that shows a ton of clips of the movie Labyrinth, which is actually how I got introduced to the movie, believe it or not.
Ew, they look weird.
Yeah, I know. That's what I like.
Weird? Who's weird?
I think I'm kind of weird.
Shut up!
But others are even weirder to see them include on the basis of, would the person even watching Muppet Babies understand or get what they're referencing? Like there's an episode that includes stuff from the Steve Martin movie, Roxanne.
What do you think?
I think it's a fantastic idea. I think it's great.
What kid in the 80s is going to know about this adult Steve Martin comedy about him with a long nose? I certainly didn't back then when I first watched this show. There's even other things, like there's an episode that talks about video games, and you see footage of the games they're playing. There's also times where they show clips from sitcoms, as we see... Oh God! Though I think the strangest has to be the episode where they include this clip. You're probably wondering, what's that from? Is it some 80s B movie that Jim Henson was able to get the rights to? No. This stop motion creature is actually from, and I am seriously not making this up, Flash Gordon, an R-rated sex comedy version of Flash Gordon. I am not making this shit up. They pretty much showed porn on the Muppet Babies. The Muppet Babies actually got away with this shit. They showed porn on the Muppet Babies. Occasionally they'll have live action footage made particularly for the show, but it's not very often. Usually for more of an original bit or gag. There's one episode that has real footage of an actual cat, where the babies have to watch over this cat. Certainly an interesting technique of combining the two mediums together. Plus, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but since it is a Marvel project, I think this might have the first official Stan Lee cameo.
Don't you know there's only one Spider-Man?
Sorry, Mr.
Though usually the live action footage is manipulated in some way in the series, with the babies in there or in other ways. I think my favorite has to be when the live action footage is so obviously dubbed. They'll occasionally have a voice actor dub over lines to make these characters act like they're talking more to the Muppet Babies. It's especially apparent when it's something everyone knows about. Like, take a look at this clip they use with Darth Vader from Star Wars.
Nanny Vader's going to be our babysitter for the next million light years.
Yes. That will give me plenty of time to get to know you.
Why, yes, that's totally not Dr. Claw, Inspector Gadget, and totally James Earl Jones, as he was for sure available for this one clip. Also, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but does this voice attached to Darth Vader make him seem a bit creepier to you? I mean, listen to what he's saying.
I'm sure you are all very well behaved, but just to make sure, we're going to take a little trip to the Space Academy.
Maybe it's coming across creepier because, I don't know, he's saying this stuff to a bunch of toddlers. Oh man, I don't like the implications of this at all. I really don't. Though possibly the strangest one I can think of was one that appeared in one of the later episodes where they talk about different movies. Scooter actually has a bit of an adventure with guess who? No, seriously. Guess who? You will probably never guess in a million years who appears as a full-fledged character in the Muppet Babies through their own movie footage.
Who are you? to Johnny 5. Maybe I can help you.
Johnny 5 of Short Circuit. Of all the characters you could have picked, they randomly decided to have Johnny 5 of this movie be a character that interacts with everyone here. And it's so bizarre to see. This relatively forgotten 80s icon is now contributing to an episode of the Muppet Babies. Just cuz. And it's weird as hell, man. It's with all of that reasoning is to why I personally believe that we will never get this series re-release officially on streaming or home media for that matter. The amount of footage they would have to get through to get all of this series that's well over 100 episodes sounds like a copyright nightmare that I don't think anyone wants to deal with. Sure, some things would be easy, like Star Wars, given Disney's ownership to both properties, but I doubt they would be able to get all of it. I think in order for the show to actually get a proper release in high quality, Disney would, no exaggeration, would have to hold the copyright of every existing property in existence. Now, you know me, I love the Muppets, but even I don't think this would be worth it. I don't think it would be worth having to live in a world fully controlled by Disney corporate overlords just so we can say, well, at least now we can watch Muppet Babies on Disney Plus in HD. Regardless though, despite this making it so Muppet Babies could never see an official re-release, it was a memorable factor to this show. It did make this series stand out in a unique way, and to their credit, they managed to still utilize these clips in clever ways. It was a way of adding more pop culture and self-awareness to the series, which is something that the Muppets are known for. And hey, it leads to some genuinely fun moments dealing with these iconic Muppet characters when they use the right footage for the perfect moment in this show.
My wish is that we stay together forever and make movies and TV shows when we grow up.
Whoopee cushion. I think it's in the bus.
Kermit, we won't know if that wish comes true until we're grown-ups.
Yeah.
How will we know if the wish ever comes true?
We'll never know. Yeah, we'll never find out.
Gee, I think my wish has a pretty good chance of coming true. What do you think?
Now, this is where I would have initially ended my Muppet Babies video, right here. But
Muppet Babies, they make their dreams come true.
in 2018, the Muppet Babies came back in the form of a reboot. So I decided to actually give this show a watch for this video in particular, because I actually had not seen much of this series. I know that might sound odd considering this was the only real Muppet thing to come out for a while, but considering that I was in my mid-20s at the time the series came out, I'm clearly not the target audience for something titled Muppet Babies. I would actually say probably more so than the original series. This is geared towards little kids, right down to the fact that it aired on Disney Junior. Though as far as shows geared towards a preschool audience goes, it's not too bad. This version of the Muppet Babies is actually helmed by Mr. Warburton. Yeah, the creator of Kids Next Door, along with character designer on Pepper Ann. It's another series I'm tackling involving this guy. The series doesn't quite have as many elements from those shows, however, but a decent amount of the same voice actors return. Much like the original series, we don't get Muppeteers voicing the characters, but typical voice actors. One of them being Ben Diskins, who voices Gonzo in this series. And I always like hearing him in stuff. Plus you can kind of tell, as his voice in this is similar to the one he does for number 2.
Out invisible bad guys, it's Ninja Gonzo to the rescue! At this time, we would like to request that you hang on to your underwear!
In comparison to the original series, the premise is practically the same. The babies hang out in a daycare where they use their imagination and go on various adventures, all still being watched by Nanny, who is voiced by Jenny Slate in the show. It definitely feels like an updated version of the show, as ultimately very similar, but there are quite a few differences. The most apparent is easily the animation, which instead of a 2D style, they opted for a CGI look. Usually I'm not for CGI animation in TV due to how so many of them don't really look that great in my honest opinion, but it actually looks pretty good here. The animation is one of the highlights, and that's mainly due to how these characters move, as the Muppets are already more three-dimensional characters, so it's fitting that we see them in the style that replicates them more accurately. More so than that, though, the characters look pretty great with some decent textures for CGI TV standards. They're a decent replication of the kind of textures you would normally see the Muppets have. The characters here even move more like the Muppets, with their mouth movements still having that flappy feel to them. What also helps is that instead of a lot of live action footage like the previous show, the show changes its art style on numerous occasions. They do use some live action footage still, and it's used for comedic purposes effectively. However, it's not nearly as reliant on it, meaning that you can actually watch this on Disney Plus because it's not a copyright nightmare. That's all fine for the animation, but what about the characters this time? Well, it's a much bigger cast than the original series, but it doesn't start out that way. The main characters you focus on is actually a smaller batch compared to how big the cast was in the original. The returning babies, who are a mainstay of the entire show, are the ones you would expect. They bring back baby Kermit, Fozzie, Gonzo, Piggy, Animal, and last but certainly not least, everyone's favorite character that's a part of the iconic Muppet cast, good old Summer Penguin. Wait, who the hell is Summer Penguin? Yeah, similar to Skeeter in the original Muppet Show, they added a new female character, this time an art-obsessed penguin named Summer. She's not bad, she kind of serves her purpose well as this creative drawer who's a good contribution to the team. It's just kind of weird that she gets included into this as a brand new character when you still have other Muppets that could be involved. So what happened to Skeeter? Well, she and Scooter do appear in the show, but a little later on, as both them, Bunsen, Beaker, and Rowlf the Dog aren't mainstays of the cast and are instead just recurring characters, which is a bit of a disappointment. But characterization wise, they're still more or less the same. In fact, the characters aren't too much different from how they were in the original series. Kermit is the leader, Piggy is the diva, Fozzie tells jokes, etc. Though there are differences between the two versions. Mainly, they decided to drop the whole Gonzo having a crush on Miss Piggy thing, which I say is for the better here. And also, I feel like some of these characters act a tad more like their original Muppet Show counterpart, as opposed to how they were in the 80s Muppet Babies. In fact, if this show does have a major advantage to the original series, is that it emphasizes more that it is a Muppet installment. There are way more callbacks to the original Muppet Show in this series. The 80s cartoon was more or less its own thing that didn't rely on having any callbacks to the Muppet brand outside of a few occasional moments. Here, there are references everywhere, such as names referencing aspects of the Muppets,
Oh boy, I can't wait to see Henson's comet tonight.
pictures of other smaller Muppet characters, and even more jokes in relation to how they act in the original show. Not to mention, Statler and Waldorf return in this series, except this time much earlier on, and they actually are their neighbors who sit up in the balcony. They're more like the original versions here, but they don't go too far with their jokes, and have plenty of episodes where they have fun adventures with the kids. I mean, they kind of have to. They'd be total dicks if they were making fun of children. Though in regards to the other characters, I mentioned this cast does get bigger as the series goes on. But not just with the Muppet Babies of the original series, minus Bean, who's oddly absent outside of this photo. We get new additions to the series, which does make this show a bit more interesting. Some of them being characters like Fozzie's little sister, Rosie, a girl frog named Jill, and Carlos?
Who
are you people?
Okay, to get the record straight, I have nothing against them adding new characters to the Muppet Babies. I am totally open to new additions. My only thing is, if you're going to add a bunch of new characters, make them a mainstay part of the Muppet cast. I don't want Summer Penguin to end up with the same fate as Skeeter. There's no reason why either of these two shouldn't be added as regular Muppet characters. Though one major plus side the series actually has, we actually get more well-known Muppet characters as part of the cast. Most of them don't appear till later on in this series, and it's not every Muppet, but they picked some good ones to be in here. Rizzo the Rat actually appears pretty early on in this series, and it's cool to see him interacting with Gonzo, since we don't see them as a duo as much as we used to. You also get Sweetums in this show as well, who's a bigger kid that the others are intimidated by at first, only to realize he's just a shy big guy who wants in on the fun. Everyone's favorite chef, Swedish Chef, appears in a few episodes as well, and it's just as funny seeing his interpretation of Swedish just being a bunch of gibberish as much as it was in the original show. Plus, you even get Sam the Eagle by the final season as well. And he looks like the child of Bert from Sesame Street and one of his pigeons. And I love him for it. Not much to say about him. They made him the kind of kid who wants things a particular way and is very proper about it, which is fitting for Sam the Eagle. Not just them, but the show does have numerous appearances of other Muppet characters, including a live-action appearance of Electric Mayhem in one episode, Pepe the Prawn appearing as a game character in another, and even the Muppet News guy at one point. The callbacks to the Muppet Show are everywhere, and it leads to the final episode of the whole series being essentially just them putting on an actual Muppet show in the vein of the original series.
It's time to get things started on the most sensational, inspirational, celebrational, Muppetational. This is called the Muppet Babies Show.
It's a cute little finale, and I kind of wish they did more episodes like this, because it's a cute little attempt at recreating the Muppet Show. And that's the best way to describe this reboot series. It's cute. I will fully admit, while I really enjoy the callbacks to this series as a whole, I actually prefer the original Muppet Babies. This is namely personal preference, as this new Muppet Babies is not a bad show in the slightest, and my preference towards the original isn't just out of nostalgia. It is definitely a factor, because having not grown up with the series, I have to completely acknowledge that this series was not made for me. Being a series on Disney Junior, this, more so than the original Muppet Babies, was made for kids. I mean, like little kids. Ages 2 to 7, I say. It's a show that doesn't really offer a lot for older audiences. Most of the stories are very standard. Character goes through a simple conflict with simple lessons for kids to be educated on. It's mostly a lot of stuff you see in other shows on PBS Kids or Nick Jr., with humor that is simple, and it's not the kind of stuff that would appeal to someone nearly in their 30s like myself. Albeit, nothing really in this is that awful. If anything, at worst, I was mostly uninterested, except for, well...
My name is Rizzo, and I'm your neighborhood rat, but you know that, so let me introduce someone new. He's a chicken from the...
There are maybe a few moments here and there they do kinda try to be hip with the kids, and being something for little kids, I can't get mad too much, but some moments like characters rapping is just a bit too cringe, when we've seen it so much. But that's not the only thing we see in this show that's kind of cringe. You ever wanted to see a Muppet floss? Well, they found a way.
Being a mommy with some pent-up energy.
And they gave it to the oldest character, so it ends up becoming a little more lame. Sure, the original Muppet Babies wasn't quite made for me either at this point in my life, but it is an interesting time capsule of the time. It's such a strange show that I enjoy it more for that reason. The original Muppet Baby got so batshit insane at points with its animation, stories, and characters, and use of live-action footage that you can't help but be fascinated by what the hell you are watching. The reboot plays it more so safe, and not nearly as mean as the original show, especially compared to how they treat Fozzie's jokes in both series. But the reboot, being a lot nicer of a show, does work to its advantage, as the show is all about learning to get along with people of different backgrounds. Most of the lessons taught on the show kind of deals with friends dealing with a conflict, only for it to just be a misunderstanding. The way the writers made these characters resolve their issues by just being honest and respectful to one another is very commendable, because it shows how you can make each other's friendships even stronger. They learn stuff like understanding that people have boundaries, but that doesn't mean they don't want to be your friend, not to make assumptions about people based on certain things about them, or just being honest with yourself about how you feel or what you want to do. And your true friends will be understanding as they can be with your true self. It's all stuff that's really sweet and makes the show something that I think is genuinely good for kids to watch. Well, except for one major controversy that this show has. One that very much upset a ton of viewers for such a heinous crime. What is it, that you ask? Well, people were upset about the episode where Gonzo wears a dress and expressed that he likes to wear a dress, and his friends are okay with that. Seriously? That's the big fucking controversy that people got so riled up about? The way the show showcases this episode was honestly pretty touching, showing that it doesn't matter how you dress, your friends should accept you for who you are. even if it's outside of the norm, it shouldn't be shamed upon that much. It's just so pathetic to see people have such an issue with it because these motherfuckers never watched the original show compared to me. You see Gonzo do this before. He seriously wore a dress in the original show a couple of times. I never saw you idiots complain back then. Wearing a dress, even if you're a guy, should be the last thing people should be concerned about. Because for one, it's not really that bad. I should know, I've done it. And second, even if you're not a fan of it per se, it doesn't really affect you that much. You might be saying, oh, it's to protect the children, which I call bull, because maybe if you want to protect the children, maybe you should see about focusing on things that actually affect them more by supporting more laws to protect them from actual terrors of the world that no kid should ever have to experience, instead of a series showing children to respect a person for who they are, because these babies are actually more mature than the so-called adults who are offended at everything like the snowflakes they are. Yeah. Ever thought about that? Anyway, Muppet Babies 2018, it's a decent little show. Not so much for older Muppet fans, but for little kids who want to get into it, it's a fun little introduction. It teaches kids good morals, it's fairly well animated, and it's just plain cute. A good reintroduction to one of the most recognizable baby versions of classic characters. And who knows, it might not even be the last of them. So what better way to end this reboot than what Kermit said?
Goodbye just means see you later.
Kermit, just imagine, wouldn't it have been wonderful if we'd known each other when we were little? Imagine, little Kermit. No matter what life may bring, no matter what I may do, be sure of one special thing. I'm gonna always be loving you. Gonna be a movie star, and I'm gonna learn to drive a car. Gonna be a veterinarian too, and I'm gonna always love you.
So, what have we learned today when it comes to the Muppet Babies? Well, they certainly have a place in history for both Jim Henson and pop culture in general. I mean, how could it not? Between everything from the two versions of this show, how it caused such a huge trend among kids shows, a big merchandising decision for the Muppet brand, and Kermit and Piggy telling you about the dangers of weed. Add in all the stuff you witness when watching the show, such as how these iconic characters are in this version, the fact it's the main animated thing dealing with these puppets, all the use of copyrighted footage, and people getting mad at Gonzo wearing a dress, and you got yourself one fascinating piece of pop culture. It's the main reason why I wanted to do this video in the first place, because the Muppet Babies has so much to it that not as many people know about. It deserves to have a video going in depth of what it did for the Muppets. I hope this video got you to learn just a tiny bit more about a very prevalent piece of Muppet history. As for the shows themselves, while I do think they are good shows, my recommendation is only for a certain kind of audience. Both shows, while having their strengths, are ultimately not really made for older audiences due to how these shows are paced and written intentionally for little kids. I don't find a whole lot that's really recommendable, unless if you are that die-hard of a Muppet fan like myself, or just want to see some of the crazy stuff the original series had to offer. Despite that though, if you have kids, I think these shows come highly recommended. They're geared for younger audiences, and as someone who liked watching the original show as a kid alongside other Muppet related stuff, I say they still succeeded. The original series has a lot of wacky shenanigans that kids would enjoy in the same way of the regular Muppet show. And the new series does have a sweet charm to it due to its commendable morals. If you want to introduce your kids to the Muppets and they're really young, this isn't a bad way to start. The Muppet Babies is one adorable little show that has such a fascinating history behind it. It might not be the definitive versions of the Muppets, but if it meant bringing more Muppet fans into the world by showing these shows at a younger age, then these babies certainly made Jim Henson's dream of having these characters last forever certainly come true. So take that for what it's worth. So yeah, thanks for watching everyone. Since I have a lot more videos than just this, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Come on, I know you want to. That's it. Go a little closer. Wait, that's not the subscribe button. Wait, you're not doing what I think you're doing. Oh no, anything but that!